Thank you so much for joining us this evening for our second webinar in the St. Joseph's College Alumni Summer Webinar Series, Conquering Debt. My name is Taryn Katusian, Associate Director of Alumni Engagement for St. Joseph's College, Long Island. I'll be one of your facilitators tonight, along with Paige Carbone, our Director, and Lisa Galasso, Assistant Director of Alumni Engagement. Our speaker tonight is Kevin Cantwell, double alum of St. Joseph's College. Kevin is a financial advisor with Mutual Inc. in Farmingville, New York, and a registered representative of Plan Member Securities, where he helps his clients manage their savings and plan for retirement. Kevin received his bachelor's degree from St. Joseph's College in 2011 and earned an M.B.A. in accounting in 2013. Please feel free to type any questions or responses in the chat window that you see throughout the webinar, and we will make sure that your comments are seen by Kevin. I'm going to turn it over to Kevin at this point, who will now begin his presentation. And once again, please feel free to ask any questions that you may have by typing them in the chat message, or if you have something that you haven't had answered by the end of the presentation, there'll be moments for you to ask questions as well.
Okay, hello everybody. Just bear with me 1 second while I get my presentation up and going. So thank you, Taryn, for that nice introduction. Thank you, everybody in the audience, for coming out and taking an hour or so of your time. I think this is a great environment for the Alumni Association to present information. So I hope you get as much out of it as we've tried to put into it. We're going to talk about conquering debt or debt management today. So just a few disclosures. Mutual Incorporated is the local arm. My plan member is my broker-dealer, and because of the regulatory environment that we live in, they have to approve everything that's being presented. Everything that's here is basically a hypothetical example, and it's for illustration purposes only. It's a general use production. We've tried to put together a presentation today that will spur some thought that maybe you can apply to your own individual situations and bring us back questions. So we hope to help you make some informed decisions today, give you a little bit of background knowledge, and help you. The presentation was designed for retirement planning, but we want you to help to plan for short-term and long-term goals, because once you have a plan in place, it's much easier to conquer your debt or stay out of debt, reduce your debt. So that's what we hope to accomplish today. So we'll talk about why debt occurs. We'll talk about, in many cases, reducing credit card debt, because that causes the greatest stress on many people's individuals and families on their budgets. So the importance of having a cash reserve and developing a budget, or as I like to call it, a spending plan. When we have the opportunity to put tax breaks to work for us, I'll show you a few ways that we can do that. And then save for the future. So if we want to save for a short-term goal or a long-term goal or an intermediate goal, we'll look at just a few different ways, and just building blocks to get you to where you'd like to be. So if we look at these situations here, if any of the conditions that are on this page apply to you, then it should throw up a red flag, and you probably have a debt problem. If you have multiple situations, as is on the page, then you should really seek counsel from an individual such as myself, or just reach out to somebody to see that you have that you have a handle on what's going on. Sometimes it's simple and sometimes it's complex, but if you have delinquent credit card accounts, it's trouble, and we'll talk about in the presentation the effect that delinquencies have. If you have maxed out credit limits, you're probably living above your means. If you take cash advances to pay bills, then that's potentially a problem. If you pay the minimum on your credit cards, it takes much longer to pay off your bills, and a lot more than you probably will to spend on the items that you purchase. And many people end up with credit card bills because they do not have an emergency fund. So I like to make sure that everybody has some sort of an emergency fund to help them through the difficult times.
Kevin, how do you build good credit without going beyond your means?
Well, a little bit of that we will talk about, but it's really living within your means. So using a credit card to pay for everyday expenses is a good thing in some cases to build credit, but you shouldn't buy things on there that you don't have the ability to pay, and you shouldn't spend the money that's in your checking, debit, or your pocket because you put other expenses on the credit card. So you want to use credit wisely when you have it, and you want to make sure that you're staying inside of a budget. So in the middle of the presentation, we talk a little bit about creating a spending plan, and that would be very important to know where you are, and building good credit is very important. So we'll talk about that as we go through the presentation as well. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So we don't save enough. As a population, we don't save enough. The slide here says 4.8% income. That was according to the Bureau of Economic Analysis in 2014. Today, it's a little bit higher than that, but I'm of the opinion as a financial advisor that we need to be closer to 20% of our salaries should be going towards savings, and that savings should be both long-term and short-term goals. And if we can get ourselves to that position where we're saving 20% of our income, then many of our debt problems go away. But that's a reach for most people, and that's my personal opinion based on longevity and somewhat of my professional opinion. So we have easy mortgages. Our parents' generations, their parents' generations, or the generations before where we are today, they couldn't go in to buy a home without 20% down. And today we're almost in an environment, we just left an environment the last few years where we could finance closing costs and in some cases furniture and improvements that needed to be made on a home. So in some cases we were purchasing a home for $200,000 or $300,000, and we were getting a mortgage for $250,000 or $350,000 to cover the expenses that went along with it. And that's really that's caused a bit of a crisis for us because we have more debt than we can really afford to carry. The cost of a college education has gone up dramatically. There are many empirical studies out there that show the value of that college education, but we still have to remember that's some of the reasons that we're not saving as much. So we need to be cognizant and aware of the fact that when necessary costs increase, then we have to take that from some other place in our spending plan. And then many people just want to keep up with the Joneses down the street. We see all sorts of advertising, television, billboards, the kids in school, our coworkers. We're always trying to keep up with individuals without knowing their circumstances, and it doesn't justify us. It just doesn't justify us having debt to have things that we want versus what we need.
Kevin, is there any such thing as good debt to have? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, there is good debt to have, or there's better debt to have. We're in a society where it's probably very impossible to put off the inevitable, purchasing cars and homes. They're a part of everyday society, and the purchase of a home provides tax-deductible debt, and it provides incentives that you don't have as a renter. So mortgage debt is generally relatively good debt. Credit card debt is very expensive. So this slide here is going to talk about, and I'll just get right into that, and hope when I'm done with this, I'll have answered the question. But if you buy something, a television, a refrigerator, for $1,000, and if you put it on a 18.5% interest, which is pretty low actually. It's probably in the middle of the scheme, but if you pay the minimum payments on that, that refrigerator or that flat screen TV costs you $2,550. And if you walked into PC Richards or Target or wherever it is that you shop, and the tag on that TV was $2,550, you probably would not have paid for that. You probably would have deferred that purchase. So when we buy a home, good debt, we're probably, if we have poor credit in today's environment, we're probably only paying 6 or 7%. There's probably some people out there that may be paying higher interest rates, but nowhere near. You wouldn't pay 18% on a home. It would be cost prohibitive. So tax-efficient debt is really good debt to have if you have to have any debt. That answer the question, Taryn?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Kevin.
Okay, great. So when we talk about credit card debt, when we talk about mortgage debt, when we talk about any of our debt, we want to know what is the annual percentage. What are we actually paying to have that luxury of letting somebody else give us the money to purchase the item that we want, whether it's a car or a television, new clothes, jewelry, home. So you want to know what is the APR, the annual percentage rate, because that tells you how much interest that you're going to pay every year, and it's every year it just stacks on until you pay the balances. So if we're looking to reduce or eliminate it, we want to have as low an annual percentage rate as we possibly can. You can shop around, you can look for better rates, but if you have credit issues, if you have any of those red flags, you're probably not going to be eligible for the best rates. And finally, consolidate everything onto 1 or 2 cards. Pay down the debt on the highest interest card first, but use your credit wisely and begin a plan to illustrate. The next slide will show a little bit about what I'm talking about, putting things on the lowest card. So if we look at the slide, we just stack them up as a Canadian Card 1, Card 2, Card 3, but if we look at the middle column in this credit card percentage and monthly payments, we want to pay off the highest annual percentage rate first. Pay off the ones that have the least amount of interest being charged, because interest being charged is an extra expense. So if you pay an extra $1,000 a year in interest, that's $1,000 a year that you don't have to save, or that you don't have in your budget to spend on something that maybe is important or something that you want. So the table at the bottom shows us just the great effect of adding $100, $200, or $300 to your payment. So if we took this $12,000 worth of debt, we paid the minimum payments, we pay over almost $4,000 over the course of 6 years. So if you pay the minimum payment, that debt is generally 6 to 8 years is the way the finance companies are generally looking for you to pay it off. So let's just take this slide, and if you had a 30-year mortgage, look at the amplification of that $4,000 over the course of a 30 or 40-year mortgage, or a car loan over 5 or 6 years. So the cost can be significant to have debt, but just adding a little bit extra each month helps you pay off that debt in a significantly shorter period of time, as well as saves you a significant amount of interest. The slide shows $100 extra paid towards the debt reduces your costs by $1,600 and cuts the amount almost in half in years to pay. So it's very significant, the cost, and if you're not aware of what your annual percentage rate is, if you're not aware of what the true cost is of your purchases, then it's probably not important, and you haven't factored it into your budget. And once you become aware of it, then you start to question whether it's good, or if it's efficient, or if it's just plain old wise to use that credit.
Kevin, is there anything I can do to lower my interest rate on a credit card or negotiate any of my fees right now?
Sometimes you can just pick up the phone and you can call your lender. If you call the lender, if you've had a good credit history, if you started out and maybe made a bad, you missed some payments at one point, that credit card interest would probably be still high, and you may be in a position where you could go to another credit card company and get a lower rate, or the company will know that you can go someplace else, and so they may give you a lower rate. But it's going to be contingent on you having paid your bills on time, as well as having relatively good credit history. So we'll talk about that as well as in a little bit further in the presentation. But if you call, the worst thing they're going to do is tell you no. So if you call the lender, if you're having problems, call the lender. You'll always be in much better position. And the worst thing they can do is tell you no. So most important, use the credit that you have wisely. Understand what the long-term costs are going to be of you putting a purchase on a credit or an interest-free loan. They might say interest-free loans, but at the end of the period, you have to pay all that interest back, and it probably starts the clock ticking. Most of the time, we get these credit disclosures once a year, or anytime the lender changes the terms, and nobody reads them. They don't know what's in them. And today they have to be written so that they're somewhat readable, but we just don't take the opportunity to read it. Many people just toss them in the garbage. So you want to try and pay off your balances in full each month if you can. My rule of thumb is if you can't afford to pay for it in 3 months, then you probably can't afford to have it in the first place. Depending on the credit card that you have, you may want to pay the bill as soon as it comes in the door, because the interest might start being charged as soon as you make the purchase or as soon as the billing cycle starts. So again, back to knowing what your card is charging you and what the terms of your credit installment credit is going to be. So and unless you have a business purpose, unless you have a significant reason why having more than 2 credit cards, my rule of thumb is that the least amount that you can have, the better off that you'll be. So I like to say 2, but let's say that you have you do your bookkeeping with your credit cards, and if you're using it as a record-keeping device, then maybe there would be a justification to have more. But at the end of the day, we want to make sure that we have that we're spending within our means. So we'll talk a little bit about our credit scores, but more importantly, each of us can go to annualcreditreport.com, and we will be able to get once a year from the 3 major credit reporting agencies, Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. We will be able to get a copy of our credit report. And because it's free, you should look at it once a year. If there are delinquencies on there, maybe something crossed in the mail. Maybe it wasn't truly delinquent. Maybe you have proof that the payment was made. Maybe somebody else put some charges on your account, or maybe they misrepresented a Social Security number or date of birth on an application accidentally or on purpose. So you want to make sure that you know what's on your credit report, so that you can have control over what's going on. And that's annualcreditreport.com. yourcreditreport.com, all one word, allows you to get one free credit report every year. You're also entitled to, if you're declined for credit in any way, shape, or form, you're entitled to a report from the agency that would outline why you were denied credit. So if Equifax said, no, you weren't eligible for a mortgage or a car loan, or they would tell you why. And sometimes it's lender specific. It has nothing to do with you. You just didn't meet the guidelines of that particular lender. And they'll tell you exactly what the reason was. So, these are the three major credit reporting agencies, and you should have a relatively good idea as to what's going on with your own individual situation.
Kevin, what determines a good credit rating?
Well, a good credit rating would be different depending on the type of credit that you're seeking. And this next slide here is going to talk a little bit about maintaining a credit rating. But so if you're purchasing a home, it's a long-term obligation, and you're supposedly going to have some equity, which means that some of your money is invested in the house as well as the lender's money. So they're going to evaluate that credit, and they're going to want a much higher credit score than maybe an auto lender that would only be responsible for 4 or 5 years of credit. So the length of credit is going to determine what's more important on your credit. And truthfully, there's no good number, so to speak. Your lender will tell you. So if you go for a mortgage, the mortgage broker will know what his or her guidelines are for an appropriate credit score for you to be purchasing a home or getting the best rate on a car or the best rate on a credit card or some other installment loan. Does that make sense, Karen?
Definitely. Thank you, Kevin. And if anybody has more questions about what a good credit rating is or anything that Kevin has mentioned already or will mention, please feel free to type those questions in the chat box at any point or at the end of the webinar. Please continue, Kevin. Thank you.
Absolutely. I'm more than happy to answer anybody's questions, and if we have individual situations, we can direct that at the end of the presentation as to how we can help you one way or the other. So this slide is going to talk about maintaining your credit rating, but we're going to want to maintain and build our credit rating, because the higher our credit score, the better our credit rating is. Generally, the lower our interest rate is going to be. And the lower our interest rate is going to be, the lower our expenses are going to be. So, as I said, a mortgage lender, their responsibility is going to be how likely is that you will pay that loan off in full on time each and every month. That's why the credit evaluation process is more difficult on certain loan applications than others. Close unused credit card accounts. If you don't use them, one of the things that I will bring out as we come through here is what goes into your credit score. So unused accounts really don't add any value to you. If you're not using them, close them out. There's less opportunity for somebody to take advantage of an account that you're not paying attention to. You don't want to apply for new cards, because let's say that you are going for a mortgage or you're going for a high-end car loan or something that's rather significant. If they see that there's other credit that's been opened inside of the last 30, 60, or 90 days, they're going to evaluate whether they're going to add that credit into the amount of credit that you have open and outstanding, and they're going to look to that as to whether you have the ability to pay all of those outstanding debts on time. And if you're just getting as a contingency, one of the things that they evaluate is how much credit that you have available to you in the event of a situation where you might go out and get it. Okay, so as I said before, the higher your credit score is generally going to be the lower the risk with individual lenders. So you're going to save yourself money by having a better credit score. we're using credit scores today for many things. So the banks are using them, the insurance companies are using some sort of a rubric that contains credit, because the feeling is that if you're a poor credit risk, you're probably going to be a poor insurance risk as well. And there are some empirical studies out there that demonstrate the parallel to the two. So insurance companies are rating with more and more fixed ratables today than they did in the past. So you want to protect your credit score. Back to the annualcreditreport.com. Know what's on it and manage it carefully to the best of your ability.
Kevin, there's a comment here from one of our participants. She says, when applying for a mortgage, they generally look for at least 2 established open lines of credit. So speak to a mortgage professional before closing or opening any lines of credit.
And that's true. And when you're in a situation where you are applying for a mortgage, if you're applying for anything high value, you're going to want to make sure that you have good contact with the mortgage person, because they'll know what your guidelines are. And as Taryn, as you brought up before, how do I start a credit if I don't have any credit? It's not that you should live without credit, but you want to use your credit wisely all the time, and you want to be in a position where you're always going to be able to, if you are using credit, you want to be in the best position that you have to get the best rate. Many, many years ago, I can remember one of my parents' friends that had the money in the bank. They could have probably purchased half the block behind us, and they went to get a mortgage because they were going to have 2 homes for a short period of time. And the bank wouldn't give them a mortgage because they had absolutely no outstanding credit. They paid for everything in cash. They didn't put anything on credit. So sometimes that can be a problem. Okay, you want to make sure that that you have established credit and understand that any new credit that you have, that outstanding line is going to stay open, and the lenders are going to evaluate whether you have the ability to pay it all back.
And Kevin, before you get into the next slide, just another question from an alum. So the question is, can your credit rating get better over time? How long does it take to really make a dent in your overall credit rating if you're trying to improve it?
Sorry, I went in the wrong direction here. Okay, so generally, month to month, your credit will get better because what goes into your credit score, 65% of it is your payment history, as well as how much do you owe and what type of debt is it. So month to month, your credit will change. As you make payments, you'll build your credit. And new credit applies for about 10%. Length of time that you have accounts open, 15%. But and the allocation is 10%. But the reality is 65% of the credit score is how much do you owe and how much your payment history is. So month to month, it will get better, and bad credit issues, such as delinquencies, will stay on longer depending on how long that you paid. So if there's a late payment on there from a mortgage lender, that's probably going to count more significantly than a late payment to a credit card or to an auto lender. And you'll have the same situation with 60 days is going to count more than 30 days. 90 days would count more than 60 or 30. So depending on the rating agency, depending on who's evaluating that credit, you want to make sure that you are fitting the guidelines where you wanted to be. Did I answer that question?
Yes, thank you so much, guys, for your questions and statements. Keep them coming as Kevin continues his presentation.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to move on now. So I talked about this in the beginning. many people end up with credit problems because we're not saving enough money. And we're not saving enough money, and so therefore we don't have emergency funds. We don't have a go-to place. So when the car breaks down on the side of the road, we're forced to put a major repair on a credit card, and now we go back to that major repair that would cost us $1,000 is going to cost us $2,500. So now our expenses have gone up significantly because we didn't have a cash reserve. We didn't have someplace to go and get those emergency funds. And so the rule of thumb will be a little different with each and every one of us, but minimum 3 months, 6 months. But if you're a very conservative person, if you have a very aggressive lifestyle where you're spending a significant amount of your income every month on necessities, then if you're spending a significant amount of time, then you're going to want to make sure that you have a greater amount of reserve. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you. Yes, absolutely, definitely.
Okay, so you're going to want to have a reserve in a money market account, someplace where it's readily available, but not that you can just walk over and use it as a cookie jar. Okay, it should be for emergency funds only, and very important. So that without the emergency fund, you're generally looking to put this on. You're going to generally look to put this on a credit card if you don't have one.
So, Kevin, how do you effectively budget and maintain a cash reserve if you live in an area with an extremely high cost of living, such as, let's say, New York City, which is right down the road for many of us?
You know, it's funny because I've given that question a lot of thought, and you know, we're on this topic now of developing a budget, but we have to understand that even though we're in a high cost of living, you're probably earning a higher salary to compensate. And even if you're not compensated more, we still have to go back to the beginning that we have to live within our means. We need to develop a budget. I like to call this a spending plan because people get very nervous about budgeting. They're scared of the term, and so when we naturally get scared, we generally just we shy away and we don't do anything about it. It's the ostrich effect. We stick our head in the sand and forget about it. But even in a high expense area, we have to learn to live within our means, and that means determining what our wants are and what our needs are. If we want to live in someplace that's higher, then we have to find someplace else in our budget that will make that affordable and doable. It's no different than renting versus buying. Until you build some equity, you don't have the ability to buy. And you know, when you're renting, now you're giving somebody else the ability to take advantage of those tax breaks that you could as well. So my answer to that question really is, as difficult as it may seem, we all just have to figure out how to live within our means. And this is the way we go about doing it. You develop a spending plan. You need to know, I'm going to start this right from the bottom. You have to compare what's coming in to what's going out. And there cannot be, on a regular basis, more going out than coming in. And if you need to, if living in a high-cost area is your only resort, then maybe you have to figure out how you can get another job to supplement the ability to stay in that area that you so want to be in. You have to organize your bills into needs versus wants, but break them down even further. Okay? If you know where it's coming from and where it's going to, you'll be in a much better position to make a decision on every purchase that you make. So I like to say, let's keep a little notebook and carry around in your purse, carry around in your top pocket, someplace where, worst case scenario, put everything you do on a debit card for a week And then just think about all the things that you spend every day, and now you have a much better idea when it's on paper on the debit card statement. What did you spend in 7-Eleven? What did you spend in Starbucks? What did you spend in the stationery store, the grocery store, the post office? It'll all be there. So it makes it a little bit easier to track your spending habits. And finally, to live within your means and get to those aggressive savings goals, you have to have automatic deductions. So transfer money from your savings account to your checking account to your savings account. If you have the ability to do a payroll deduction at work, or long-term savings, if you have the ability to contribute to a retirement plan, that comes out first, and then you only have the ability to spend what's left. So I know that was probably a long-winded answer to your question, but I tried to incorporate everything together. So I hope that made sense to whoever presented that question to me, Taryn.
Absolutely, Kevin. And if there's, if that person wants to clarify more or wants to ask more specific questions, there'll be time either now or at the end for additional questions. So please feel free to ask more if you need to clarify. Thank you, Kevin.
Absolutely. Okay, so there's assistance out there everywhere. We have apps that will help us track our spending. Just to name a few, you want to go to the reputable sites, Kiplinger's, whatever you're comfortable with. It needs to be simple. It needs to be easy to follow, or you're not going to create a good spending plan. And without a good spending plan, in all likelihood, most people are just going to overspend, not knowing whether they're living within their means. Okay. Once you do a little bit of work, you'll know, and you'll make better informed decisions as to whether you want to pay that extra money for that refrigerator or that flex screen TV. Okay. Maybe you buy a 52-inch instead of a 64-inch because it fits inside of your budget. Even though you really wanted an 80-inch, we still have to figure out what's going to work inside of our own individual situations. Okay, so when we live within our means, we need to understand clothing and personal use items generally have very little value later on. Maybe, if you're in that high rent area, if you're living in the city, maybe you're shopping consignment, maybe you're purchasing, used goods, somebody else's secondhand. It might not be the optimum, but at least it gives you the ability to have the best of both worlds. When we buy a home, it's an asset that appreciates. When we buy personal use items, they generally depreciate. They're worth less tomorrow than they were today. So we need to be cognizant of that. Save your next raise or bonus. With that, if you live on a bonus situation, if you live in an overtime situation, then you should really be budgeting for what's going to come out week to week, month to month, so that at the end of the year or whatever period it is that you choose, that you'll know that you have the ability to pay all your bills. So, for instance, if you're budgeting with overtime or a bonus, if you don't get the bonus, or if you don't get the overtime that you expected, then you don't go on the vacation, or maybe you buy a lesser car when the appropriate time comes. So you want to be cognizant of what's guaranteed to be coming into your household and set up that savings fund. Today we have the lowest interest rates that you're going to get on mortgage debt. So if you have the opportunity, go find a good qualified mortgage broker that will help you see whether it's going to make sense for you to refinance your mortgage, take advantage of lower rates, and then put that savings towards reducing other debt or to building better savings goals. Okay, drive your car up an extra year. We came into the lease situation where now if you own a car, 3 years or 39 months is up, and you go out and you get another. You know, if you put yourself in that position, you're probably always going to be living based on something that you want versus something that, you know, the rest. Some of this stuff is you know, simple and should be common sense. Coupons and local vacations. The biggest thing is impulse buying, right? Think about how much money you spend on coffee and sandwiches out. That, you know, if you cut that in half, you probably have a significant savings that was available to you to reduce your debt or save for bigger things that were more important to you. Okay. Cable channels and fancy telephone features. My comment there is look and see if there's any features on your phone bill that you really don't need to have. And if you don't need to have them, don't pay for them. Ask the companies to take them off. You look at all your household expenses in the same vein. So this slide just illustrates, I said when we talk about long-term versus short-term goals, this is talking about retirement plan. But if you look at the 5-year plan, if you were in a tax-deferred situation, an extra $40 per paycheck over 5 years adds almost $5,000 in extra savings for you. Over 10 years, it's a little over $10,000. So small increments. We don't have to start out with big goals. Every little bit that we save, that we reduce our expenses or save for the future, is a building block towards getting us to the things that we really want long term. So take any one of these pieces on the chart here and see. So if it was 15 or 20 years, the significance of just saving a little bit more money to fund a college education, or let's just do the math in reverse, paying a little bit more on a mortgage for 30 years would the opposite of saving that, having the extra money there, you would probably reduce your expenses just by applying a little bit more towards your debt. So, again, very important, save for whatever goal it is, knowing what you're looking for at the end of the rainbow, so to speak. Okay, Roth IRAs, traditional IRAs, this is a little complex, a little bit more complex than I really would like to talk about here, but the tax deferral helps you build long-term savings. So if you're saving for a college education for children, or if you're saving for retirement, you want to take advantage of whatever tax deferral opportunities that you have. So your traditional IRA is going to save you the tax up front, and you'll pay the tax later on at the deferred amount. And the Roth IRA is going to give you no tax break up front, but it will give you the tax break when you take the money out later on. Okay, the value here is really just the power compounding with tax deferral. So take all your savings and defer whatever you can taxation. A college savings account, the sooner you start, the better off that you'll be. They're very simple to open. The next slide is very complex because the demonstration of a 529 plan can be somewhat complex. If you're not sure that the kids are going to go to college or trade schools, it may not accomplish what it is that you want to. You may have certain tax breaks by using one plan versus another in your state, but they're relatively easy to get started. You can start with relatively small, insignificant amounts that won't affect your personal budget right away. Okay, and as I said, the disclosure is pretty substantial, only because they can be complex state to state, and they vary according to everybody's individual situations. Okay, but they do offer you the power of tax deferral, which help you save more money. Okay, so I really like this slide. Forget about the saving for a college plan, but look at if you wanted to save $3,000 for a year for a down payment on a vehicle, or If you wanted to save for 5 years and you wanted a significant amount of savings to put down on a mortgage, you take the 5-year chart. If you needed $30,000 to put your 20% down on a home, the chart there just shows you that you need to save $500 a month. Now, these are at 3% annual percentage rates of return, relatively low, but it's just an illustration. And if you think about you're planning for the future, whether it be short-term or long-term, it will tell you what your plan should be, okay? And you just adjust it to your own individual situations. Okay, so I just have, because this is for the Alumni Association, we didn't include anything in the presentation specifically about student loan debt. So I'd like to talk about that before I finish with this personal action steps. And the student loan process is a little complex because there are so many lenders out there that you could possibly have been exposed to. But you have subsidized loans and you have unsubsidized loans, and basically that just determines whether you're paying interest or who's paying the interest. More importantly to the whole student loan situation is you want to make sure that you're paying your bills on time, because you cannot ever walk away from the student loan debt without one of the programs that are in place to allow you to do that. Okay, so I'm going to sort of start right from the beginning. 6 months after you get out of school, you go half-time, you have to begin to pay those student loans. The loan is generally going to be set, the interest rate is going to be set in advance, but the interest starts to build on an unsubsidized loan you're paying right from the day of disbursement. So as soon as the lender makes the check payable to the institution, you start incurring expenses. So they can be significant. If you're in school for 4 or 6 or 8 years, that interest can be rather significant when you're finished. Generally, the loan terms are 10 years. You can in some cases go as far as 25 years. But remember, interest is an expense, and the longer you have a debt outstanding, the higher your carrying costs are. So your interest expense is much higher, irregardless of what your interest rate is. So if you have a higher interest rate, you're generally going to pay more expense. If you have a longer term, you're going to pay a higher expense. So if you don't have the ability to pay your student loans, you have to call your lender. Don't be the ostrich. Stick your head in the sand and pretend like everything's going to be okay. You have to call the lender, because the student loan defaults will also count towards your credit score, and other debt that you're looking to secure, such as a mortgage, could be affected by your inability to pay the student loan debt. You can consolidate, in some cases, loans because they came from multiple lenders or they came in multiple years. But remember, sometimes consolidation just adds to the length of time that you have the credit outstanding. The longer the credit's outstanding, the higher interest costs are going to be, the less money that you actually have to spend on things that you want. All right? You do have the ability to postpone some payments if circumstances are, they fit the guidelines. So again, if you have a problem, you need to reach out to the lender and see if the conditions apply. And finally, if you go to studentloan.gov, I'm just going to, before I do this, I'm going to go to a browser that I have set up here. This is the website here, studentloan.gov, and there are all these tools, okay, about what's available, grants that are available if you're teaching, what the repayment is going to be. So there's a lot of information that's out here. frequently asked questions. If somebody else has asked the question, I'm sure that maybe that yours will be very similar. Okay, so very important. Make sure that you speak to your lender, that you manage what's going on if you have student loan debt, because the student loan debt is going to essentially be long term, and it's probably going to impact your ability to borrow money for other things that you may need. Okay, so you want to be very careful. You want to be diligent about repaying those loans. We talked in the beginning about the value that a college education actually adds. So they're a necessity, but you want to make sure that you manage repayment properly. So I'm going to close with these personal action steps. This is how I like to make sure that we wrap up this whole topic of conquering debt or debt management. You want to identify and you want to reduce the debt, because when you reduce the debt, you're reducing your expenses. And when you reduce your expenses, you either have more money to spend week to week, month to month, or you have more money to save to get you to where you want it. A good credit rating gets you lower interest costs, and lower interest costs gives you more money in your pocket. Very, very important to maintain a cash reserve, an emergency fund, however you want to call it, but segregate it from your personal spending, and make sure that it's deducted right from the beginning, either payroll deduction or from your checking account to your savings account, and it's gone out of your pocket. Develop a spending plan, know what's coming in, and understand how it goes out. Okay, is this something that I need, or is this something that I want? And if you decide at some point you're involved in a payment, you can always change it. Understand that, if you have a car loan that's 4 years old, you're going to have to wait 4 years. But if you make the decision and stick to that decision week to week, month to month, or year to year, you know that you'll be in a better place. So you absolutely, positively have to live within your means. So I'm going to go back to my original statement. The old rule of thumb used to be 5% savings would be good. I really believe that we need to be closer to saving 20%, because if anything happens to us, if we lose our job for whatever reason, whether it's illness or disability or illness of a family member, we only have to replace 80% of our income. If we're spending 103%, as many people are today, we have to replace 103% of our income when we don't have the ability to generate that income. Okay, and then finally, save for retirement, save for education. I'm an opportunity person. I think that as society lives longer, that we all need to be aware of the fact that we're going to live longer, and we're going to want opportunity funds that are going to allow us to recreate ourselves, leave a job so that we can start a new opportunity. And that only comes by living within your means and having a good savings plan. So, Karen, it's back to you.
Thank you, Kevin, for that amazing introduction and your slides and your questions. I think that this was an amazing webinar, and as you think about any questions, any last thoughts, comments, or statements that you may have for Kevin, we just want to give you some information right now about the rest of our Alumni Financial Webinar Series. So this series was created in part of a large response to our St. Joseph's College alumni really asking for concentrated workshops on financial planning from experts in the field who know these sources best. So we've just had Conquering Debt here with Kevin Cantwell. We'll be working towards on August 10th, The American Dream, Myths and Truths About Buying a Home, followed by Retirement Planning on September 14th. To register for any of these upcoming webinars, you can also go to alumni.sjcny.edu/websummer16, and you will be able to view any previous webinars that have been part of this webinar series as well. I'd like to also invite you to keep the conversation going with our Twitter page at SJCNY Alumni. If you have any questions for Kevin there, you can use the hashtag SJCNYConquer, and we will make sure they get to him. You can also find us on LinkedIn, St. Joseph's College, New York Alumni and Friends. Please make sure you connect there with us. We're over 1,100 members strong on our member page, and we're growing every day. Definitely make sure you check out our Facebook page and Instagram for all things alumni, including our Centennial Concert Celebration on Friday, September 30th at the Space at Westbury, featuring platinum recording artist Philip Phillips. This is our Centennial Concert. We're celebrating 100 years, and we can't wait to do it with Philip Phillips in Westbury in September. With that in mind, as you think of questions, Kevin, I actually have 2 questions for you right now that I'm going to ask. If people have any additional ones, please feel free to type them in. My contact information is below here. If anyone's interested, if they have more specific situations and they want to get in touch with Kevin himself, I can help facilitate that with you. But in the meantime, the first question, Kevin, from someone was, how do you build credit when you don't have any? Most people are turned down due to little or no credit.
Well, the thing that you have to do is you have to apply, and then if you're declined, you need to go back to the credit reporting agency that's listed on the declination. You need to get the report from them, see what's on it, and then determine how you can go about correcting that. If it's just the lack of credit history, well, then maybe you have to start someplace. You have to start someplace else. And instead of applying again, maybe you want to call a lender and explain your situation. All the credit card companies will take a solicitation generally over the phone to see if your condition, your circumstances fits their parameters. So you don't want to just continually apply, because that's going to hurt your credit history. The declinations will add up. And as a last resort, many of the banks and then many of the credit card companies that are out there will let you do what's called a debit card, okay? And it would be, you have to put equity, so you put $500 in the bank, and they will allow you a $500 credit on a credit card. And what you do then is you buy something, you pay it back. You buy something, you pay it back in 2 installments instead of 1 installment. Remember, you want to make sure that you're buying something that you can afford, because it's critical when you start to build credit that you pay those credit cards on time as they're due, because that's the way you build good credit. I hope that answered the question. If somebody has a follow-up to that, I'd be more than happy to give more.
Absolutely. We'll wait for that follow-up if it's coming. And in the meantime, the next question we have is, this is kind of an either-or. So the question is it better to have 5 open credit cards with small balances on each, or 1 credit card with a high balance?
Well, that will depend on each individual circumstances. So, remember, the credit card company wants to know, do you have the ability to repay that balance? So given the either or that you gave me, I need to know the circumstances of all those cards before I can say one way or the other. So if you have 5 cards with significantly high interest rates and you can consolidate that to 1, then I'm of the opinion that you consolidate them to 1, pay them on time, reduce your exposure, reduce your expenses, and you're probably personally going to be in a better situation. But to just be an either-or question, I think that I don't think that I would advise that, because generally, as I said, we want to have 2. We want to have we want to have a good mix of credit, and I think that to add into that scenario, you need to know what the outstanding balance is on those credit cards. So let's say that you have a $500 limit on a credit card. That's a small small balance, but if that's the limit, the credit card companies that are offering you credit know that that card is maxed out. Okay, there's not much more available credit, and that's a factor in your score. Okay, so you want to make sure that all the pieces of the puzzle fit. And I'd probably, given those circumstances, rather answer that with all the information rather than generalize that.
Okay, great. And there's another question here. So this person wants to know, should you ever close a credit card? And if you do, how would it affect your credit score?
Well, remember that your credit score is going to be directly affected by the accounts that are open. And if you don't need that credit, if you don't need the credit and you have the ability to pay it back, then maybe there's no harm, no foul. But typically we get these types of credit questions when we're looking to build credit. So if it's just there for absolutely no reason, then close it. If it's there as your fallback or your emergency fund, rather than have to go out and apply for credit when you don't need it, that might be justification. But if there's no reason to have it open, then close it.
Okay, I think that is all the questions from our participants this evening. I'd like to thank you, Kevin, so much for your insights, your expertise, and breaking down some of these really complex concepts for all of us. Like I said, if anyone has some more questions that come to them later on, or they want to connect directly with Kevin, you can reach out to me, Taryn Katusian here. My title is Associate Director of Alumni Engagement. You can reach me at this phone number here, 687-2654, or you can reach me at my email address, tKatusian@sjcny.edu. If anyone has any additional thoughts, thank you so much, Kevin, for your presentation.
So, Taryn, can I just wrap that up? Because the questions become individual questions, and it's very, very, very difficult to answer individual type questions with generalizations, because everybody's situation is unique, and everybody's situation is evaluated by the lender, and the guidelines are not always crystal clear. So it's very difficult to answer a question, and most situations can be looked at in multiple ways depending on what you're trying to accomplish.
Thank you for that. Thank you so much for that, Kevin. Also, one thing I forgot to mention, we will be sending a survey to our participants. Your feedback is extremely valuable to us in helping us continue to improve our webinar series. So please make sure that you take 5 seconds and fill that out for us. Thank you so much, Kevin.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening.